Welcome to Flaxborough, a perfectly ordinary English market town where the most exciting event is usually the annual flower show, and the biggest scandal involves questionable marrow measurements. But one Saturday morning, this peaceful facade crumbles when residents discover their 200-year-old bronze statue, the silent watchman, wearing the mayor's solid gold chain of office around his neck. Where are you listening from tonight? Whether you're in a quiet village or a bustling city. The Flaxborough Borough Amenities and Horticultural Exhibition had achieved, by 10:30 on a Saturday morning, that particular state of bustle which indicates there is nothing left to buy and a great deal to discuss. In the market hall, elderly ladies moved with the measured precision of experienced campaigners among trestle tables bearing prize cucumbers of improbable girth, Victoria sponges that possessed the moral certainty of parish sermons, and preserves whose labels suggested genealogies rather than ingredients. Alderman Mrs. Cream, who was not actually an alderman but had been so described for so long that even she had ceased to correct the misapprehension, stood near the center aisle comparing marrow circumferences with the gravity of a coroner examining evidence. "That specimen, Mrs. Voss," she declared, indicating a pale green tube in the 3-foot class, "cannot be entirely marrow. There is a suggestion of artifice about the neck." Mrs. Voss murmured agreement, having learned that nothing increased Mrs. Cream's satisfaction quite like being supported in her suspicions. At the far end of the hall, Mayor Councillor Horace Jellaby approached the microphone with that mixture of springiness and apprehension that characterized his public appearances. As the town's optician, he was fond of saying he could throw light upon matters, though this did not guarantee he could avoid the occasional pane of glass. His mayoral chain, heavy gold links that had graced the necks of Flaxborough's civic leaders since 1847, caught the morning light streaming through the hall's tall windows, lending him an authority that his mild disposition might otherwise have struggled to project. "Friends," he began, having practiced the opening in his bathroom mirror that morning, "and I hope that in this borough the words friends and ratepayers may happily coincide." His prepared remarks were interrupted by a small, sharp sound from near the entrance, the sort of noise one might make upon discovering a spider in one's teacup. Miss Lucinda Teatime, the town's self-appointed guardian of propriety, stood frozen near the doorway, one gloved hand pressed to her throat. "Look," she said, her voice carrying with the penetrating quality that had made her such an effective Sunday school teacher. "Look at the watchman." Every head in the hall turned toward the marketplace, visible through the open doors. There, on his bronze plinth, where he had stood guard over Flaxborough's commerce since 1788, the figure of the silent watchman, lantern raised, halberd at rest, wore an unexpected ornament. Around his metal neck hung the mayor's chain of office, glinting in the morning sun with that particular smugness that gold displays when it knows it is being observed in the wrong place. Mayor Jellaby's hand flew to his throat, confirming what the crowd had already deduced. His Adam's apple performed a small, involuntary dance of mortification. Mr. Puckle, the town clerk, responded with administrative instinct. "We shall need a ladder," he announced, as if this solved everything. The retrieval operation that followed possessed all the dignity one might expect from a civic emergency conducted in full view of the market day crowd. Constable Rawlinson, elected by default to perform the ascent, discovered that whoever had decorated the watchman had secured the chain with florist's wire, thin, green, and twisted with the expertise of someone familiar with flower arranging. Inspector Purbright arrived from the Royal George, where he had been enduring a luncheon club presentation on The Secret of Success by a gentleman whose own success appeared to have departed through the swing doors 5 minutes earlier. The constable who summoned him wore the apologetic expression of an amphibian asked to cross busy traffic. "Trouble at the hall, sir." The mayor's chain. Purbright collected his bowler hat, which possessed the indefinable air of having attended to people's business before they knew they had any, and walked toward the marketplace. The bronze watchman, now restored to his usual unadorned state, gazed down with what might have been satisfaction. Purbright, who could imagine few things more vain than a statue with a secret, smiled slightly and continued toward the hall. Inside the market hall, the exhibition had resumed its appointed course, though with an undercurrent of speculation that seasoned the air like pepper in soup. Observations were made and filed away for future reference. The wire had come from Pottle's florist shop. The mayor's safe showed no signs of tampering. Councillor Sedge, who operated a small car business in a road that had the decency to be both distant from and invisible to the town hall, had been seen smiling at the watchman in a manner that might have been considered inadvisable to return. Mrs. Cram, having temporarily abandoned her Marrow investigations, pronounced judgment. "One hopes this is merely a prank. Though in my experience, Inspector, what begins as mischief often reveals itself to be something rather more serious." Purbright, who had learned to find wisdom in the most unlikely sources, nodded thoughtfully. In 23 years of police work in Flaxborough, he had discovered that the apparently impossible often proved to be precisely what had occurred, particularly when civic dignity was involved. As the crowd gradually dispersed, returning to the serious business of evaluating root, vegetables, and discussing the moral implications of store-bought jam, Purbright made his own quiet observations. The chain had been removed from the mayor's office overnight, a building to which relatively few people possessed keys. The wire used suggested someone with access to florist's supplies, yet the act itself required both opportunity and a peculiar sense of theater. Most intriguingly, the choice of the silent watchman as recipient seemed deliberate. The bronze figure had stood guard over Flaxborough for nearly 2 centuries, a symbol of vigilance and civic duty. To adorn him with a chain of office suggested either a profound sense of irony or a message that someone very much wanted the town to understand. Purbright adjusted his spectacles and considered the cucumbers, which never told lies. In Flaxborough, he had learned, the most innocent-seeming events often cast the longest shadows. This morning's peculiar incident, he suspected, was merely the first movement in a composition that would prove considerably more complex than a simple case of civic mischief. The silent watcher's revenge, if revenge it was, had only just begun. The peculiar incident of the mayor's chain had achieved by Monday morning that particular status in Flaxborough's social hierarchy where fact becomes subordinate to interpretation. At Mrs. Higgins's bakery, where the scent of fresh bread usually dominated all other considerations, Miss Lucinda Teatime held court with the authority of someone who had witnessed history in the making. Her account had grown more detailed with each telling, acquiring embellishments that would have impressed a medieval chronicler. "It was arranged with deliberate ceremony," she informed Mrs. Cram, who had paused in her inspection of currant buns to listen, "as if someone were conducting a coronation for the dead." The wire was twisted with expertise, not the hasty work of a prankster, but the careful preparation of someone with a message to convey. Mrs. Cram, who had spent sufficient years observing Flaxborough's inhabitants to recognize the difference between observation and embellishment, nodded thoughtfully. "One wonders about the symbolism," she murmured. "The silent watchman has stood guard over our commerce for 2 centuries. To adorn him with a chain of office suggests either profound irony or someone who believes our current guardianship requires supplementation." Inspector Purbright, who had learned that the most revealing conversations often occurred in the spaces between official interviews, made his way through the town's morning routines with the unhurried pace of someone collecting impressions rather than evidence. His first formal call was upon Mr. Pottle, whose flower shop occupied a narrow frontage between establishments that had long ago settled into comfortable mediocrity. Mr. Pottle himself possessed that particular relationship with soil that extended beyond his fingernails to his general philosophy of life. When Purbright inquired about wire, The florist's response carried the precision of someone whose livelihood depended upon the correct gauge of metal. "Green 15 gauge, spring temper," he confirmed, examining a sample coil with professional interest. "Use yards of the stuff. Anyone could help themselves. I keep it on the counter for small purchases." "Never thought to monitor it, Inspector. One assumes that people who steal florists' wire have reached a level of desperation that deserves sympathy rather than prosecution." The wire matched exactly the sample Constable Rawlinson had retrieved from the watchman's neck. Purbright made a note that looked casual, but wasn't, and inquired about recent customers. "Mrs. Harker bought some Tuesday for her flower arranging circle," Pottle recalled. "They're attempting autumn abundance this month, though between you and me, Inspector, abundance seems optimistic given September's meteorological offerings." He paused, dirt-stained fingers drumming against the counter. "Then there's young Councillor Sedge. Came in Thursday, very particular about getting the right sort. Asked specifically for the green. Said it was for training roses that didn't understand discipline." The town hall, when Purbright visited it an hour later, wore that air of administrative certainty that public buildings assume when they believe themselves to be above suspicion. Mayor Jellaby, discovered in his office still unconsciously touching his throat, exhibited the nervous precision of a man who had rehearsed explanations without being entirely convinced by them. "Most peculiar business, Inspector," he said, gesturing toward the glass case where his chain now rested with the sullen air of an object that had been made to participate in an undignified adventure. "Locked it away as usual. Friday evening, Saturday morning, gone. No signs of forced entry, nothing else disturbed." Purbright examined the lock, which showed no evidence of tampering. The mechanism was solid, reliable, and entirely dependent upon someone possessing the correct key. "Who has access?" "Myself, naturally. Mr. Puckle, the town clerk. Mrs. Harker, who comes in to clean Tuesday and Friday mornings." Jellaby paused, his optician's precision asserting itself. "And the councillors, of course." "We issued them keys when the new security policy was implemented last year. Councillor Sedge was most insistent about it, said it was important for council members to have proper access to municipal facilities. Mr. Puckle, when summoned, brought with him that air of administrative resentment that suggested someone had violated the natural order of filing systems. "The safe combination is known only to the mayor and myself," he declared with the emphasis of someone who had anticipated this question. Yet the chain was removed without the dial showing signs of interference. "Signs of interference," Purbright observed mildly, "can be like signs of affection. They may occur only when unneeded." Mr. Mortimer, the caretaker, possessed that lean and orderly philosophy that approaches dust as a personal enemy and disorder as a moral failing. His testimony carried the weight of someone who knew each step by its imperfections. "I locked the side door at 7 sharp, he declared. Mr. Puckle had left at 6:10. The mayor departed earlier for his Rotary obligations. The safe was shut at 4 o'clock. I hear it from the corridor. Makes a little bird chirp when the handle's turned, like a small kettle that's decided to be private." "Who else was about?" asked Sergeant Love. "Mrs. Tudge, charwoman." Mortimer pronounced this with absolute confidence in Mrs. Tudge's inability to interfere with municipal property. "And young Roper from the Borough Surveyor's office came for drawing pins and stayed long enough to display ignorance of maps. Mrs. Tudge, when located making a red patch of soap suds look ashamed of itself in the corridor, possessed the immovable certainty of someone who had witnessed 10 years of municipal behavior without being impressed by any of it. Mr. Puckle left at 6:10. Mr. Mortimer locked up at 7. Young Roper came for pins and went away with a folder he shouldn't have had." She paused, fixing Purbright with a stare that had measured countless infractions. "The mayor's office was shut, and if it had been opened after, I'd have heard it or smelt it. There's a smell to council rooms when the wrong person goes in, like boiled sponge." The afternoon found Purbright at Councillor Sedge's residence in Alma Road, a neat terraced house that spoke of careful maintenance and modest prosperity. Sedge himself answered the door with that slightly defensive smile of someone who had been expecting an unwelcome visitor, a compact man with prematurely thinning hair and the sort of mustache that suggested he had studied distinguished gentlemen in magazines and attempted to purchase their appearance from a barber. The sitting room displayed the aggressive respectability of someone determined to demonstrate their belonging. Every surface gleamed, every cushion sat at regulation angles, and the bookshelf contained volumes that appeared to have been selected more for their spines than their contents. "Extraordinary business with the chain," Sedge said, settling into his armchair with calculated ease. "Though I must say, Inspector, there was something rather fitting about it. The silent watchman has stood guard over our town for centuries, and here we have a mayor who can barely be bothered to attend council meetings." The criticism hung in the air with the weight of long-suppressed resentment. Purbright made encouraging noises, having learned that people often revealed more than they intended when discussing others' shortcomings. "Not that I bear any personal animosity toward Jellaby," Sedge continued, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone walking across thin ice. "But the office deserves better. The chain represents something important: civic duty, public service, the continuity of local government." "You purchased some florist's wire recently," Purbright observed, allowing the statement to settle between them like a cat choosing where to sit. Sedge's pause was fractional but telling. "For my garden, yes. I'm attempting to train some climbing roses. Dreadfully uncooperative things, roses. They seem determined to grow in every direction except the one you want." When Purbright examined Sedge's hands during their conversation, he noted they were recently washed but not recently rested. There was a faint green stain under the nail of the right thumb, the sort of mark a man might acquire from twisting wire. By evening, Flaxborough had reached that comfortable stage where everyone possessed a theory and most were prepared to defend it against evidence. At the Green Man public house, old Mr. Bunting held forth with the confidence of someone who had solved mysteries that hadn't yet been properly formulated. "This is a message," he declared to the assembled company. "Someone's got a bone to pick with Jellaby. And why not? Always been too big for his boots, with his spectacles and his talk of civic duty." From his office, where the clock ticked with a loyalty that was more admirable than interesting, Purbright wrote in his notebook with a hand that kept secrets even from the writer. "Keys," he noted. "Chain. Wire. Access." The florist's wire could be obtained by anyone, but the chain required specific knowledge and opportunity. The timing suggested someone who understood the mayor's routines, the building's security, and the town's Saturday morning rhythms. Most intriguingly, the choice of the silent watchman seemed deliberate, not merely convenient, but symbolic. Someone had wanted to make a point about vigilance, about who truly watched over Flaxborough's interests. Sergeant Love, returning from his evening rounds, delivered intelligence gathered from the town's various watering holes. "They think it's Sedge," he reported, "or Miss Tea Time, or a conspiracy involving the Rotary Club." "Conspiracies," Purbright observed, "are generally too complicated for Flaxborough. We are a town that prefers its mysteries to have simple solutions and complex motivations." He closed his notebook and reached for his hat. "Tomorrow we shall discover whether Mr. Sedge's roses have benefited from his recent horticultural purchases. Gardens, like alibis, often tell more truth than their tenders intend." The town settled into its evening routines, carrying with it the comfortable weight of unresolved mystery. Somewhere in Flaxborough, someone was either sleeping the sleep of the satisfied prankster or lying awake considering whether their message had been properly understood. The silent watchman, restored to his usual unadorned dignity, kept his bronze counsel while the inspector pondered the curious relationship between civic duty and private revenge. Tuesday, Morning arrived with that particular quality of reluctant light that suggested autumn was making appointments without consulting anyone's diary. Inspector Purbright, who preferred to begin investigations when the dew still held secrets that afternoon sunshine might evaporate, found himself once again at Councillor Sedge's neat residence in Alma Road. Sedge answered the door with the sort of prepared cordiality that indicated he had been rehearsing this moment since dawn. His sweater possessed a high neck that seemed designed to repel both draughts and uncomfortable questions. "Inspector, I trust you've come to admire my horticultural efforts, though I fear the roses are proving as recalcitrant as some of our council members." The laugh that accompanied this observation had been pressed and starched, but not recently worn. The back garden displayed the geometric precision of someone who believed that nature, like municipal policy, benefited from firm guidance. The climbing roses, trained against a wooden trellis, showed evidence of recent attention. Green wire appeared throughout the arrangement, though in quantities that seemed modest compared to what Mr. Pottle had described selling. "You mentioned requiring quite a lot of wire," Purbright observed, his tone carrying no more weight than a comment about the weather. Sedge's hands, Purbright noted, moved unconsciously to his gardening gloves. "One always overestimates, doesn't one? And I have plans for expansion. Long-term horticultural investment." His thumb bore a faint green smudge that might have resulted from handling coated wire, though it could equally have originated from any number of garden activities. Sergeant Love, who had been examining the wire fastenings with the concentration of someone attempting to appear knowledgeable about climbing plants, straightened. "Cut very neat these are. Proper snips." From beyond the low brick wall that separated Sedge's domain from that of Mrs. Pavitt, a lady whose late husband had been a bus inspector and whose current occupation was the benevolent surveillance of her neighbors, came the unmistakable sound of interest disguised as gardening. "Morning, Mrs. Pavitt," Sedge called with that strained cheerfulness of someone about to receive unrequested testimony. The grey head appeared above the wall with the alertness of a periscope detecting interesting shipping. "Morning, Councillor." "Morning, Inspector. Come about the chain business, I expect." "We are admiring gardens," Purbright said mildly. "Gardens often reveal more than their tenders intend." Mrs. Pavitt's smile encompassed this philosophy with approval. Sunday evening, Councillor Sedge was out here past 9 o'clock with his torch, fussing with those roses like a man who'd been told it was gardening or divorce. She paused, savouring the inspector's attention. "And there was that business Friday with the young gentleman from the council. Knocked twice, he did. Pity you were out, Councillor." Sedge's prepared explanations seemed to rearrange themselves behind his eyes. "I was at a subcommittee meeting. We finished at 6. Young man looked as if you could file him alphabetically," Mrs. Pavitt continued with satisfaction. "Very particular about wanting to see you, though. Left something, I think. Or took something. Hard to tell with council business." Later, in the privacy of the police station, Purbright examined the wire samples with the methodical attention he reserved for details that insisted upon their own importance. The loop retrieved from the watchman's neck had been twisted with expertise, what Mrs. Harker, when consulted, had identified as a wreath tuck, the sort of finish employed in funeral arrangements when appearance mattered more than permanence. "2 different cutting techniques," he observed to Sergeant Love. The wire from Sedge's garden showed the clean severance of sharp secateurs, while the sample from the watchman bore the slight flattening that indicated slightly dulled blades, or perhaps different hands with varying degrees of skill. "Different tools, sir." "Or different purposes," Purbright replied. "One cuts wire for roses, another for messages. The intentions may require different degrees of finality." The Church of St. Bartholomew's Parish Hall that afternoon hosted the reconvened flower arranging circle, where 5 ladies approached autumn abundance with the sort of determined optimism that characterized most of Flaxborough's cultural endeavors. Miss Teatime presided over an array of chrysanthemums that had clearly been lectured into submission. "The incident at the market hall," she announced, while demonstrating the proper technique for securing recalcitrant foliage, "represents a fundamental breakdown in civic respect. Someone has treated our municipal dignity as material for theatrical display. Her wire-cutting technique possessed the precision of extensive practice. The green coils at her disposal appeared both comprehensive and recently diminished, though this could be attributed to the ambitious scope of autumn abundance." Mrs. Harker, whose cleaning responsibilities at the town hall provided her with unique insights into municipal behavior, offered observations while coaxing eucalyptus into artistic submission. "The mayor's safe has been visited more frequently of late. You can tell by the finger marks on the dial. Someone's been consulting it regular-like, though whether with authorization is another matter entirely. The wire technique," Miss Teatime added, tucking ends with practiced efficiency, "requires proper instruction. One doesn't simply twist metal and hope for aesthetic success. The ends must be secured, hidden, made to appear effortless while providing absolute reliability." The afternoon's most significant development occurred at the Borough Surveyor's office, where young Mr. Roper occupied a desk that suggested someone was fighting a losing battle against the proliferation of planning documents. His nervous disposition had been amplified by recent events to the point where he resembled a rabbit that had received advance notice of the hunting season. "Mr. Roper," Purbright began gently, "you were at the town hall on Friday afternoon." The young man's Adam's apple performed an involuntary dance of apprehension. "Yes, sir. Just collecting drawing pins for Mr. Pilkington. He needed them urgently for a drainage map." "And you encountered no one else during your visit?" Roper's eyes darted about the office as if seeking escape routes that had been blocked by filing cabinets. "Well, sir, I did hear voices. From the mayor's office, I think. Sounded like a rather heated discussion." This intelligence settled into the investigation like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that reached every established assumption. According to previous testimony, both the mayor and Mr. Puckle had departed by 6:10, yet Roper claimed to have heard multiple voices engaged in animated conversation after that time. "Multiple voices, Mr. Roper?" "Yes, sir, at least 2. Perhaps more. I didn't wish to intrude, so I collected my pins and departed quickly. But it did seem rather intense." Purbright's subsequent consultation with Mr. Finch at the public library revealed the symbolic weight that someone had chosen to invoke. The silent watchman, erected in 1788 following a series of market thefts, had been intended as a bronze embodiment of civic vigilance, a permanent guardian against malfeasance when human watchmen proved either expensive or unreliable. "The symbolism is quite deliberate," Mr. Finch explained, his eyes gleaming with the pleasure of sharing historical significance. "To place the mayor's chain upon the watchman's neck suggests either profound irony or a pointed commentary about the current state of civic guardianship." The historical records revealed another layer of complexity. The statue had been funded largely by the Sedge family, prosperous merchants whose descendants had maintained their connection to local commerce until recent economic reversals. The current Councillor Sedge was the last of his line, a circumstance that might explain his particular sensitivity to questions of civic duty and traditional standards. As Tuesday evening settled over Flaxborough with the comfortable weight of unresolved mystery, Inspector Purbright sat in his office considering the day's accumulation of evidence and contradiction. The technical analysis suggested multiple participants or at least multiple stages of preparation. The timeline had acquired complications that transformed a simple prank into something more complex and personal. The heated discussion in the mayor's office after hours indicated confrontation rather than whimsy. Someone had possessed both access to the building and sufficient grievance to engage in animated debate before proceeding to their symbolic gesture. The choice of the silent watchman as recipient seemed increasingly deliberate, not merely convenient, but carefully selected for its historical and symbolic resonance. Councillor Sedge remained the obvious suspect, possessing motive, means, and opportunity. His family's connection to the watchman provided symbolic justification, his recent wire purchases offered practical capability, and his obvious resentment toward current civic standards supplied emotional drive. Yet the evidence suggested complications that a simple case of municipal revenge might not accommodate. The flower arranging circle's technical expertise could not be dismissed, particularly Miss Teatime's demonstrated skill with wire work and her vocal criticism of declining civic standards. Mrs. Harker's observations about increased access to the mayor's safe suggested someone had been conducting unauthorized consultations with municipal property. Most intriguingly, young Roper's testimony about the Friday evening confrontation indicated that the chain's removal might have been the culmination of a dispute rather than its beginning. Someone had possessed sufficient authority or determination to engage the mayor or his representatives in heated discussion before proceeding to their theatrical gesture. Purbright closed his notebook and reached for his coat. Tomorrow would bring fresh conversations and perhaps the small detail that would illuminate the difference between obvious guilt and actual responsibility. In Flaxborough, he had learned, the most important truths often wore disguises that fooled everyone except those patient enough to wait for voluntary revelation. The silent watchman, standing guard through another night, maintained his bronze silence while the town carried its various portions of guilt and suspicion into dreams that would be neither entirely peaceful nor completely troubled. Somewhere in Flaxborough, someone was either sleeping the sleep of satisfied justice or lying awake wondering whether their message had been properly understood. The investigation had acquired the complexity that characterized Flaxborough's most interesting mysteries. Multiple suspects with plausible motives, technical evidence pointing in various directions, and the growing certainty that Saturday morning's incident had been merely the visible portion of something considerably more intricate and personal than a simple case of civic mischief. Wednesday arrived with that particular quality of gray morning light that encouraged indoor confidences and discouraged outdoor activities, precisely the conditions Inspector Purbright found most conducive to the advancement of investigations that depended more upon human observation than physical evidence. The town had settled into its conviction about Councillor Sedge, with the comfortable certainty of people who preferred their mysteries to have obvious solutions, though Purbright had learned that obvious solutions in Flaxborough often possessed inconvenient complications. His first call was upon Mayor Jellaby, discovered in his optician's shop arranging spectacle frames with the nervous precision of someone who had spent the night rehearsing explanations. The shop's bell announced Purbright's arrival with an enthusiasm that the proprietor clearly did not share. "Inspector," Jellaby began before Purbright could speak, "I trust this unfortunate business is nearing resolution. The whispers are becoming quite disruptive to municipal harmony." Purbright settled into the customer chair and allowed his gaze to drift to a small key cabinet behind the counter. One hook bore a conspicuous gap where something had recently hung. "Your key arrangements appear admirably systematic, Mayor, though one notes a certain absence." Jellaby's hand moved unconsciously to his throat, that gesture having become habitual since Saturday's incident. "Oh, yes. The spare key to my office. Rather embarrassing, actually. Went missing last week. Tuesday, I believe. Found it the following morning in the most peculiar place, the minutes box for the amenities committee. We assumed some absent-minded placement, though one wonders. Who has access to the minutes box? Mr. Puckle, naturally. Miss Teatime occasionally consults it for reference. She maintains an admirable interest in procedural accuracy. And the committee members, of course, though they rarely demonstrate such diligence. Purbright made a note that appeared casual, but wasn't. Young mister? Roper mentioned hearing voices in your office Friday evening, after normal business hours. The mayor's attempt at casual dismissal fell somewhat short of convincing. Ah, well, there may have been a brief consultation. Councillor Sedge returned for some documents. We had a minor discussion about the War Memorial flower beds. Entirely routine municipal business. Mr. Puckle was present for this horticultural consultation? No. Puckle had departed. Just Sedge and myself, discussing herbaceous borders with perhaps more enthusiasm than the subject strictly warranted. Jellyby's smile carried the weight of someone who had discovered that explanations could be more burdensome than mysteries. The town hall's service entrance, when examined in daylight, told a story that normal business hours had concealed. Mr. Mortimer, summoned from his methodical battle against municipal dust, brought to the discussion that air of professional competence that suggested someone had been expecting this particular inquiry. Service door shows signs of recent use, he declared, indicating fresh oil disturbance on the hinges and a scuff mark on the threshold. Someone with leather soles, moving careful-like in poor light. Not my rounds. I know my own footmarks. Who possesses keys to this entrance? Myself, mister. Puckle and the councillors, though they're meant to use the front entrance except in emergencies. His tone suggested that councillors' interpretation of emergency often differed from municipal regulations. Mr. Puckle, when consulted about Friday evening's events, exhibited that particular form of administrative anxiety that suggested recent disruptions to established routines. His account of the evening's conclusion had acquired overnight the sort of defensive precision that indicated careful consideration of what might have been observed. The mayor and I departed together at 6:10, he declared with emphasis. The building was properly secured. If Councillor Sedge returned later, it was without my knowledge, and certainly without my presence. This contradiction between the mayor's admission of a consultation and Puckle's denial of any further presence suggested either deliberate deception or a misunderstanding that had acquired the weight of official testimony. The charwoman, discovered applying moral pressure to a stubborn stain in the council chamber, possessed observations that had ripened overnight into significance. Her testimony carried the authority of someone who had spent sufficient time in municipal buildings to distinguish between authorized and suspicious behavior. Friday afternoon, there was a telephone conversation in the mayor's office that went on considerably longer than usual, she reported while attacking the stain with renewed determination. Raised voices, you might say. Something about proper procedures and traditional standards. The mayor kept saying impossible and absolutely not, like someone was asking him to approve gold-plated dustbins. And when you cleaned the office Tuesday morning, Mrs. Harker paused in her work, fixing Purbright with a meaningful stare. There was a teacup on his desk. Fine china, not the usual municipal crockery, and it had a lipstick mark, not the mayor's shade, if you catch my meaning. Coral pink, I'd say, the sort of color that suggests someone takes care with their appearance. This detail settled into the investigation like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that reached every established assumption. A feminine presence in the mayor's office, indicated by fine china and coral pink lipstick, suggested complications that simple municipal mischief could not accommodate. Later examination of the silent watchman's plinth revealed traces that normal observation had missed. The bronze base showed faint smears of beeswax furniture polish, the well-bred odor of drawing rooms rather than municipal maintenance. On the ledge where someone might steady themselves while climbing, Purbright discovered scuff marks that had not been made by Constable Rawlinson's regulation boots. Near the statue's base, the morning wind had deposited a small rectangle of card against the paving stones. It bore the embossed cornucopia of Pottle's flower shop but carried no message. The corner was bent, as if impatient fingers had detached it from some arrangement. Mr. Pottle, when consulted about recent deliveries, possessed that comprehensive knowledge of local commerce that characterized successful tradesmen. Funeral tribute. Friday afternoon to a house near the town hall. Card was left blank. Some people prefer their condolences understood rather than written. My boy passed through the marketplace twice that evening. Noticed someone had positioned a small step ladder against the watchman around 10 o'clock, though it was gone by morning. Young Mr. Roper, when summoned for additional questioning, arrived with the air of someone who had been expecting this conversation with considerable dread. His carefully prepared explanations dissolved under Purbright's patient attention, revealing a young man who possessed uncomfortable knowledge and insufficient courage to volunteer it. I saw Councillor Sedge using the service entrance Friday evening, approximately 7:30. He admitted with the relief of someone abandoning an untenable position. He was carrying something, a small case or folder. Seemed purposeful, not furtive exactly, but determined. This timing created a significant problem for established alibis. According to Mr. Mortimer's routine, the service entrance should have been secured at 7:15, yet Roper claimed to have witnessed unauthorized access 15 minutes later. His motorcar remained in Mill Lane when I passed again at 8:15. Unusual parking for someone conducting routine business. As Wednesday evening descended upon Flaxborough, Inspector Purbright sat in his office considering the accumulating evidence that suggested motivations considerably more complex than municipal mischief. The technical evidence pointed toward Councillor Sedge with increasing clarity. His wire purchases, his access to the building, his obvious resentment of current civic standards, and his family's historical connection to the silent watchman. Yet the investigation had revealed undercurrents that simple guilt could not explain. The missing spare key that mysteriously reappeared in the minutes box suggested careful planning rather than impulsive action. The Friday afternoon telephone confrontation indicated that someone had attempted to resolve grievances through official channels before resorting to symbolic protest. Most intriguingly, the teacup with its coral pink lipstick mark suggested a feminine presence that had not appeared in any official testimony. Someone had shared fine china in private conversation in the mayor's office. Someone whose involvement had been carefully concealed from the investigation's obvious direction. The wire work had displayed two different cutting techniques, indicating either multiple participants or carefully staged preparation. The beeswax traces at the statue's base suggested domestic rather than municipal maintenance, while the stepladder evidence confirmed that Saturday morning's discovery had been the culmination of considerable preparation. Purbright closed his notebook and reached for his coat. Tomorrow would bring the careful questioning that would distinguish between obvious guilt and actual responsibility. In Flaxborough, he had learned, the most apparent solutions often concealed more interesting truths about human nature and the quiet desperation that lay beneath respectability's well-maintained surface. The evidence suggested that Councillor Sedge had indeed been present at the town hall Friday evening, had engaged in heated discussion with municipal authority, and possessed both means and motive for the symbolic gesture that followed. Yet the teacup, with its feminine implications, suggested that Saturday morning's incident might have been less about individual revenge than collaborative statement. A message composed by multiple hands and executed with the sort of precision that indicated shared purpose rather than solitary grievance. The silent watchman, standing guard through another night of municipal uncertainty, maintained his bronze vigilance while the town carried its various portions of knowledge and suspicion into dreams that would be shaped by the growing certainty that the obvious suspect might prove to be merely the most visible participant in a composition of considerably greater complexity than anyone had initially suspected. Thursday morning presented itself with that particular quality of gray light that encouraged indoor confidences and discouraged hasty conclusions. Precisely the sort of weather Inspector Purbright found most conducive to investigations that depended more upon human observation than physical evidence. The coral pink lipstick mark on the mayor's teacup had settled in his mind with the persistence of a tune that refuses to be forgotten, and he had determined to trace its origins with the methodical patience that characterized his most successful inquiries. His first call was upon Mrs. Letts at the chemist's shop, where the morning air carried that faintly medicinal scent of a place where minor ailments queued politely for relief. Mrs. Letts herself possessed the professional demeanor of someone who had spent sufficient years dispensing remedies to distinguish between genuine distress and theatrical complaint. Coral pink, Purbright observed mildly, appears to be a popular shade among Flaxborough's ladies. Mrs. Letts' commercial instincts responded with enthusiasm. Indeed, Inspector, we stock 2 varieties. Sunset coral for those who prefer understated elegance, and flamingo for ladies who wish their presence to be noted from considerable distances. She paused, her shopkeeper's memory sorting through recent transactions. Miss Teatime favors sunset coral, as does Mrs. Puckle. In fact, Mr. Puckle purchased 2 tubes last week, one assumes for his wife, though gentlemen's understanding of cosmetic requirements often exceeds their wives' actual needs. This intelligence settled into Purbright's notebook with quiet significance. Mrs. Puckle, whose presence at the town hall had not featured in any previous testimony, yet whose lipstick might have left its mark on municipal crockery. The public library's local history section, where Miss Teatime could often be found conducting research with archaeological thoroughness, provided the next piece of the developing picture. She looked up from a leather-bound volume of borough records with that alert expression of someone who had been expecting this conversation while hoping it might be indefinitely postponed. "Inspector," she greeted him with careful brightness, "I trust the investigation proceeds satisfactorily. The town requires resolution. Uncertainty encourages the most undesirable speculation." Purbright settled into the chair opposite, noting the precision with which she had arranged her materials. "Your expertise with wire work has been most illuminating, Miss Teatime. The technique displayed on Saturday morning suggested considerable skill." "Wire work requires proper instruction," she replied, demonstrating with an imaginary piece of metal. "One must secure the stem firmly while ensuring the fastening remains invisible. It demands both precision and aesthetic sensibility." Her fingers moved with practiced dexterity, illustrating the wreath tuck that had secured the mayor's chain so effectively. "The specific gauge, green 15 gauge, spring temper?" "Mr. Pottle's finest, though his prices have become rather ambitious lately." She paused, her gaze meeting his with steady directness. "I was consulting the mayor about the proposed cuts to the flower show budget last Friday. A matter I feel requires urgent reconsideration." The admission carried weight beyond its apparent simplicity. Purbright made notes that appeared casual while recording details that might prove significant. Mayor Jellaby, discovered in his optician's shop adjusting spectacle frames with nervous precision, exhibited the defensive posture of someone whose prepared explanations had been revealed as inadequate. The shop's orderly displays seemed to mock his obvious discomfort. The consultation with Miss Teatime, Friday evening, Purbright began without preamble, appears to have been more spirited than your initial account suggested. Jellaby's hand moved unconsciously to his throat, that gesture having become habitual since Saturday's incident. Miss Teatime possesses strong opinions about municipal priorities. She felt that recent budget decisions demonstrated insufficient appreciation for Flaxborough's cultural traditions. She remained after normal business hours for this horticultural discussion. The conversation extended beyond anticipated duration. Miss Teatime can be quite persuasive when defending causes she considers important. The mayor's voice carried the weariness of someone who had discovered that civic duty sometimes required enduring lectures on civic duty. "And she had access to your office keys?" Jellaby's pause extended well beyond the requirements of careful consideration. The spare key went missing that evening. I discovered it had been returned to the minutes box the following morning. Mrs. Harker found it there Tuesday. Most peculiar arrangement. Mrs. Harker, encountered in her cottage garden where she was conducting warfare against aphids with the determination of a military strategist, provided testimony that illuminated the evening's actual complexity. Her account possessed the precision of someone who had observed municipal behavior without being impressed by its pretensions. Friday afternoon, the mayor's office hosted more than one visitor, she declared while applying organic insecticide with surgical precision. Heard voices through the door, missed tea times, certainly, but others as well. Sounded like a proper committee meeting, though no committee was scheduled. Others. Councillor Sedge arrived around 6:30 after Mr. Puckle had departed. Used the service entrance. I saw him from the cleaning cupboard window. Carried himself like a man with official business, though his business wasn't on the official schedule. This intelligence transformed Friday evening from a simple consultation into something approaching a clandestine gathering. Purbright made encouraging noises, having learned that Mrs. Harker's observations often revealed more than their speakers initially intended. The teacup with the coral lipstick was present when I arrived to deliver the Horticultural Society minutes. Fine china, not the usual municipal crockery. Someone had been entertaining properly, though entertaining whom remained unclear until later. Later examination of the silent watchman's plinth revealed traces that normal observation had missed. The bronze base bore faint smears of furniture polish, the well-bred fragrance of drawing rooms rather than municipal maintenance. Near the statue's base, caught against the stone molding, Purbright discovered a small fiber of brown string, slightly waxy to the touch. The parish hall's step ladder, when examined, told its own story. The implement bore traces of the same furniture polish, and its restraining rope had been replaced with common parcel string, the sort of expedient repair that suggested urgent nocturnal use, followed by hasty restoration. Miss Tea Time, when questioned about the ladder's Friday evening absence, admitted to borrowing it for arrangement practice, but claimed to have returned it before 9 Saturday morning. The timing suggested someone had required elevation assistance during the crucial hours when the mayor's chain was transferred to its symbolic destination. Mr. Pottle, consulted once again about his recent customers, provided details that had gained significance through repetition. Miss Tea Time purchased wire Tuesday for the flower arranging circle. Councillor Sedge bought a substantial quantity Thursday. Said his roses required disciplinary training. Both requested green 15-gauge specifically. The technical analysis revealed 2 distinct cutting patterns on the recovered wire. The primary fastening showed the clean severance of sharp secateurs, while the decorative wreath tuck bore the precise finish of practiced hands. Someone with professional expertise had collaborated with someone possessing adequate tools but lesser skill. As Thursday afternoon settled over Flaxborough with the comfortable weight of accumulating evidence, Inspector Purbright found himself contemplating a case that had evolved from simple municipal mischief into something approaching collaborative theater. The technical evidence pointed toward multiple participants with complementary skills. Miss Tea Time's wire-working expertise and Councillor Sedge's physical capability combining to achieve their symbolic protest. The Friday evening gathering in the mayor's office had clearly involved more than routine consultation. Miss Tea Time's passionate defense of cultural traditions, Sedge's resentment over municipal policies, and the mayor's defensive responses had created conditions for the sort of frustrated alliance that characterized Flaxborough's most interesting civic developments. The coral lipstick on the teacup suggested Mrs. Puckle's involvement, though her role remained unclear. The spare key's mysterious journey from the mayor's office to the minutes box indicated careful planning rather than impulsive action. Someone had anticipated the need for subsequent access and had prepared accordingly. Most significantly, the choice of the silent watchman as recipient seemed increasingly deliberate, not merely convenient, but carefully selected for its symbolic resonance. The Bronze Guardian had stood watch over Flaxborough's commerce for centuries, representing the sort of permanent civic vigilance that current municipal leadership apparently lacked. The investigation had revealed the sort of community tensions that characterized Flaxborough's most complex mysteries: traditional expectations confronting modern necessities, personal loyalty challenged by fiscal reality, and the eternal conflict between symbolic gesture and practical administration. The Saturday morning incident had been the visible culmination of grievances that had been developing through official channels before finding expression through unofficial demonstration. Purbright closed his notebook and prepared for the delicate conversations that would be required to distinguish between principled protest and unlawful demonstration. The town had settled upon Councillor Sedge as the obvious culprit, but the evidence suggested a more complex arrangement involving multiple participants with shared concerns about civic standards. Tomorrow would bring the careful questioning that would reveal whether Saturday morning's theatrical gesture had been motivated by genuine principle or personal grievance. In Flaxborough, he had learned, the most apparent solutions often concealed more interesting truths about human nature and the quiet desperation that lay beneath respectability's well-maintained surface. The silent watchman, standing guard through another evening of municipal uncertainty, maintained his bronze vigilance while the town carried its various portions of knowledge and suspicion into dreams that would be shaped by the growing certainty that the obvious suspect might prove to be merely the most visible participant in a composition of considerably greater complexity than anyone had initially suspected. The alliance was emerging from the shadows of careful misdirection, though its full dimensions remained to be explored through the sort of patient investigation that would reveal not just who had decorated the Bronze Guardian, but why such decoration had seemed necessary to preserve Flaxborough's civic soul. Friday morning arrived with that particular quality of reluctant sunshine that suggested even the weather had grown weary of Flaxborough's municipal complications. Inspector Purbright, who had learned that the most revealing conversations often occurred when people believed their explanations had been accepted, decided that the time had come for the sort of polite but persistent questioning that distinguished genuine inquiry from mere administrative routine. Mrs. Puckle received him in her sitting room with the prepared cordiality of someone who had spent considerable time rehearsing casual responses to uncomfortable questions. The room bore that aggressive respectability which suggested its occupant had studied successful households in magazines and attempted to purchase their social standing from department stores. Her coral pink lipstick had been applied with professional precision, though her nervous habit of touching her mouth indicated recent anxiety about its significance. "Inspector," she began with carefully modulated warmth, "I trust this unfortunate business with the mayor's chain approaches resolution." Such an extraordinary incident, though one must admire the artistry involved. Whoever arranged it possessed considerable aesthetic sensibility. Purbright settled into the offered chair, his gaze drifting to a small collection of keys hanging near the window. "Your husband mentioned Friday evening's conclusion with his usual administrative punctuality. 6:10 departure, no subsequent municipal obligations." The pause that followed carried weight beyond its duration. Mrs. Puckle's hand moved unconsciously to adjust a small gold chain at her throat. "Harold is most particular about his schedules, Inspector. Though Friday evening he seemed rather preoccupied. Mentioned something about impossible requests and traditional standards being compromised by modern efficiency. You visited the town hall that evening yourself." The question settled between them with the deliberate weight of a chess piece being positioned. Mrs. Puckle's prepared responses seemed to rearrange themselves behind her carefully maintained composure. "I brought Harold his evening tablets. His digestion requires careful attention during periods of municipal stress. Found him engaged in rather animated discussion with Miss Teatime about the flower show appropriations. Such passion for civic horticulture is admirable, though it does extend conversations beyond their natural conclusions. The morning's most intriguing development occurred at the offices of the Flaxborough Citizen, where Mr. Mortlake produced an envelope with the theatrical reluctance of someone who had been saving unpleasant news for a more fortified moment. The letter itself bore that particular combination of careful anonymity and urgent message that characterized Flaxborough's more interesting communications. "Posted Monday afternoon, local postmark," Mortlake explained, his editorial instincts clearly torn between professional discretion and natural curiosity. The typing suggests someone familiar with municipal correspondence, proper spacing, official format, though executed on a machine that lacks the precision of council equipment. The message itself possessed an almost biblical gravity. When guardians forget, symbols must remember. The watchman will correct what officers neglect. It was signed simply, "An interested party who keeps late hours." Purbright studied the letter with the attention he reserved for evidence that insisted upon its own importance. The phrasing suggested someone with access to official language but operating outside official channels, perhaps someone who typed council minutes but harbored private reservations about council policies. Mr. Pilkington at the Borough Surveyor's office provided the context that transformed Friday evening's heated discussion from simple budget disagreement into something approaching municipal crisis. His desk displayed the organized chaos of someone fighting a losing battle against the proliferation of planning documents, each representing another compromise between practical necessity and traditional sentiment. "The county has mandated traffic flow improvements," he explained with the weary precision of someone who had delivered unwelcome news to multiple committees. "The marketplace requires rationalization, wider turning circles, improved access for commercial vehicles. The silent watchman, unfortunately, occupies the precise location where modern traffic patterns demand additional space." This revelation illuminated the symbolic weight that someone had chosen to invoke. The bronze guardian, erected by the Sedge family in 1788 as a permanent symbol of commercial vigilance, now faced displacement by the very progress it had been intended to protect. The irony would not have been lost on anyone with historical perspective and contemporary grievances. "Miss Teatime's opposition has been comprehensive," Pilkington continued. "She submitted a 17-page historical analysis demonstrating the statue's cultural significance. Councillor Sedge provided genealogical documentation of his family's connection to the original commission. Even Mrs. Puckle contributed research about the economic impact of removing established landmarks. The afternoon's interviews revealed the Friday evening gathering as something approaching a formal conspiracy, though one motivated by principle rather than personal gain. Miss Teatime, when pressed for additional details about her extended consultation with the mayor, admitted to the presence of both Mrs. Puckle and Councillor Sedge in what she described as an informal committee dedicated to preserving Flaxborough's essential character. The mayor had received preliminary drawings for the marketplace improvements, she explained while serving tea from china that matched the cup discovered in the mayor's office. "We felt it essential to present alternative perspectives before irreversible decisions were made. Mrs. Puckle contributed financial analysis, Councillor Sedge provided historical context, and I offered aesthetic considerations. The discussion extended well beyond normal business hour." "Civic duty recognizes no conventional schedule, Inspector. We remained until the mayor fully understood the implications of his proposed policies. The conversation was vigorous, but entirely appropriate to the gravity of the situation. Councillor Sedge, discovered in his garden applying fertilizer with the concentrated energy of someone working through frustration, confirmed the alliance while revealing its emotional dimensions. The meeting represented our final attempt to resolve matters through official channels," he declared, his gardening gloves still bearing traces of the green wire he had purchased for Rose training. "When reason fails, Inspector, symbolic gesture becomes necessary." The mayor's chain was removed that evening. Sedge's pause carried the weight of someone choosing between complete honesty and protective discretion. The spare key was available. Mrs. Puckle's knowledge of municipal procedures proved invaluable. We felt a quiet, dignified demonstration might succeed where formal protests had failed. The wire evidence, when examined in light of these admissions, revealed the collaborative nature of Saturday morning's installation. The primary fastening around the watchman's neck showed Sedge's competent but unprofessional cutting technique, while the decorative elements displayed Miss Teatime's practiced expertise with floral arrangements. Mrs. Puckle had contributed logistical coordination and access to necessary materials. The step-ladder's nocturnal journey from the parish hall to the marketplace indicated careful planning. Someone with church access had provided elevation assistance, while someone with administrative knowledge had ensured the mayor's discovery of his missing chain would appear to result from careless security rather than deliberate theft. As Friday evening settled over Flaxborough, Inspector Purbright sat in his office considering evidence that had revealed not simple mischief but carefully orchestrated civic theater. The three conspirators had each contributed essential elements: technical skill, historical knowledge, and administrative access to create their symbolic statement about municipal priorities and traditional values. The choice of the silent watchman as recipient carried deliberate irony. The Bronze Guardian, commissioned to protect honest commerce, now wore the chain of office to suggest that current civic leadership had forgotten its essential duties. The message was neither subtle nor accidental, but represented the culmination of frustrations that official channels had failed to address. Yet questions remained about the extent of municipal complicity. The mayor's obvious discomfort suggested knowledge he had not shared, while the spare key's careful manipulation indicated planning that extended beyond simple opportunism. Someone had anticipated the investigation's direction and had prepared explanations that would satisfy surface inquiry, while concealing deeper implications. The letter to the Flaxborough citizen suggested the protest had been intended for public consumption rather than private satisfaction. Someone wanted the town to understand not just what had occurred, but why such demonstration had become necessary. The symbolic gesture was merely the visible portion of a larger statement about civic responsibility and community values. Tomorrow would bring the careful confrontation that would distinguish between principled protest and unlawful demonstration. In Flaxborough, Purbright had learned the most important truths often wore disguises that fooled everyone except those patient enough to wait for voluntary revelation. The silent watchman, standing guard through another night of municipal uncertainty, maintained his bronze vigilance while the town prepared for revelations that would prove more complex than anyone had initially suspected. The investigation had achieved that comfortable complexity which characterized Flaxborough's most interesting mysteries. Obvious guilt complicated by admirable motives, technical evidence pointing toward collaborative action, and the growing certainty that Saturday morning's incident had been merely the visible portion of something considerably more intricate than simple civic mischief. The truth, when finally revealed, would require the sort of diplomatic resolution that satisfied justice without entirely sacrificing the intricate web of small-town loyalties and genuine grievances that made such mysteries possible. Saturday morning arrived with that particular quality of gray light that suggested autumn had decided to conduct its business with greater seriousness, a development that Inspector Purbright found conducive to investigations requiring delicate handling of civic sensibilities. The week's accumulation of evidence had revealed not simple mischief, but the sort of principled conspiracy that characterized Flaxborough's most interesting municipal crises, though certain details continued to suggest complications that even principled conspiracy might not entirely explain. His morning began with an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Harker arrived at the police station with the purposeful stride of someone who had spent the night organizing uncomfortable truths into presentable order. She carried a manila folder with the reverent care usually reserved for family Bibles or final demands. "Inspector," she announced without preamble, There are matters that require proper understanding before this business concludes in ways that serve nobody's interests. She placed the folder on his desk with decisive finality. I've been cleaning municipal offices for 12 years. One learns to distinguish between authorized irregularities and the other sort. The folder contained photocopies of correspondence between the Borough Council and the County Planning Authority, documents that should have remained in official files but had clearly been removed for private consultation. The letters revealed the full scope of the proposed marketplace redevelopment, not merely the silent watchman's removal, but a comprehensive modernization that would eliminate most of Flaxborough's historical character in favor of improved traffic circulation and commercial accessibility. Mrs. Puckle copied these Thursday afternoon. Mrs. Harker explained with the precision of someone whose observations had been carefully catalogued. Use the machine in Mr. Puckle's office while he attended the Finance Committee meeting. Took considerable care to return the originals to their proper files, though not quite to their proper positions. The correspondence included a confidential addendum marked "For Mayor's Eyes Only" that detailed the financial incentives the county was prepared to offer for prompt compliance with the modernization schedule. The sum mentioned would have solved most of Flaxborough's budgetary concerns while transforming its essential character beyond recognition. The mayor received this information Monday, Mrs. Harker continued. Spent considerable time locked in his office that afternoon, making telephone calls that carried through the walls. Sounded like a man receiving unwelcome news from multiple directions. Purbright's subsequent consultation with Mr. Finch at the public library revealed the symbolic weight that the conspirators had chosen to invoke. The Silent Watchman's commissioning in 1788 had followed a similar controversy over market improvements, when the Sedge family had led successful resistance to changes that would have prioritized commercial efficiency over traditional arrangements. The irony would not have been lost on anyone with historical perspective, Mr. Finch observed, while producing a leather-bound volume of borough records. The statue was erected specifically to symbolize the triumph of established values over hasty modernization. To threaten its removal for similar reasons represents either profound insensitivity or deliberate provocation. The records revealed that the 1788 controversy had divided the town along similar lines. Established families defending traditional arrangements against municipal authorities advocating practical improvements. The resolution had required months of negotiation and had established precedents for community consultation that subsequent generations had apparently forgotten. Mayor Jellaby, discovered in his office staring at planning documents with the expression of someone contemplating an unwelcome inheritance, exhibited the defensive posture of a man whose prepared explanations had been revealed as inadequate. The Morning Post had brought additional correspondence from the county, marked "Urgent Response Required," that lay unopened on his desk like an unexploded device. "The situation has acquired complexities," he admitted when Purbright inquired about the week's developments. "What appeared to be simple administrative efficiency has revealed itself to involve considerations that extend well beyond traffic circulation." His voice carried the weariness of someone who had discovered that civic leadership sometimes required choosing between impossible alternatives. The Friday evening consultation with Miss Teatime and the others? Jellaby's pause extended well beyond the requirements of careful consideration. They presented arguments that I had not fully appreciated. Historical precedent, community sentiment, the symbolic significance of established landmarks. Their research had been comprehensive. Research that included confidential correspondence. The mayor's hand moved unconsciously to his throat, that gesture having become habitual since Saturday's incident. Mrs. Puckle possesses administrative skills that sometimes exceed official boundaries. Her understanding of municipal finance revealed implications that official summaries had not adequately conveyed. The afternoon's interviews revealed that Friday evening's gathering had been the culmination of a week-long investigation into the county's proposals, conducted by citizens who had discovered that official channels provided insufficient information for informed participation in democratic processes. Miss Teatime's historical research, Mrs. Puckle's financial analysis, and Councillor Sedge's genealogical documentation had combined to create a comprehensive case against the proposed changes. We attempted to work within established procedures, Miss Teatime explained when confronted with evidence of their unauthorized research. The mayor received our initial concerns with polite dismissal. Traditional approaches to civic engagement proved inadequate when confronted with confidential negotiations and predetermined conclusions. The spare key's careful manipulation, the after-hours consultation, and the precise timing of the chain's removal had been elements in a carefully orchestrated demonstration designed to force public discussion of matters that official discretion had kept private. The symbolic gesture had succeeded in drawing attention to issues that conventional political processes had failed to address. Sergeant Love's analysis of the recovered wire revealed two distinct cutting patterns that confirmed collaborative action involving multiple participants with complementary skills. The primary fastening showed Councillor Sedge's competent but unprofessional technique, while the decorative elements displayed Miss Teatime's practiced expertise with floral arrangements. Mrs. Puckle had contributed logistical coordination and access to necessary materials and information. The step-ladder's nocturnal journey from the parish hall to the marketplace indicated planning that extended beyond simple opportunism. Someone with church access had provided elevation assistance, while someone with administrative knowledge had ensured the mayor's discovery of his missing chain would appear to result from careless security rather than deliberate demonstration. As Saturday afternoon settled over Flaxborough, Inspector Purbright found himself investigating not simple criminal mischief, but the sort of civic theatre that challenged conventional distinctions between lawful protest and unlawful demonstration. The conspirators had possessed legitimate grievances, had attempted official resolution, and had resorted to symbolic gesture only when traditional channels proved inadequate for addressing confidential negotiations that would fundamentally alter their community's character. The technical evidence confirmed the alliance's collaborative nature while revealing their careful attention to symbolic detail. The choice of the silent watchman as recipient had been deliberately ironic. The Bronze Guardian commissioned to celebrate successful resistance to unwelcome change had been decorated with symbols of authority to suggest that current leadership had forgotten the lessons of history. Yet questions remained about the extent of official complicity. The mayor's obvious discomfort suggested knowledge that extended beyond simple victimization, while the ease of access to confidential documents indicated either administrative carelessness or tacit cooperation. Someone in authority had either failed to prevent the demonstration or had chosen not to prevent it with the thoroughness that municipal security normally demanded. The investigation had revealed community tensions that transcended simple criminal behavior. Traditional expectations confronted modern necessities. Personal loyalty challenged official duty, and the eternal conflict between symbolic gesture and practical administration created conditions for the sort of principled resistance that made municipal governance an exercise in diplomatic complexity. The week's events had transformed a simple case of municipal mischief into something approaching organized civil disobedience, though civil disobedience conducted with the sort of polite determination that characterized Flaxborough's approach to most controversies. The Saturday morning incident had been merely the visible portion of a larger statement about democratic participation and community values. Purbright closed his notebook and prepared for the delicate conversations that would be required to resolve matters without entirely destroying the intricate web of small-town loyalties that made such mysteries possible. The silent watchman, standing guard through another weekend of municipal uncertainty, maintained his bronze vigilance while the town prepared for revelations that would prove more diplomatically challenging than anyone had initially suspected. The investigation had achieved that comfortable complexity which suggested resolution would require wisdom rather than simple justice. Tomorrow would bring the careful questioning that would distinguish between admirable motivation and inexcusable method, though Purbright suspected the distinction might prove less clear than municipal regulations suggested. In Flaxborough, the most important truths often demanded the sort of careful handling that preserved community harmony while acknowledging both legitimate grievances and necessary consequences. The silent watcher's revenge was revealing itself as something considerably more principled than mere municipal mischief, though whether principle could excuse unlawful demonstration remained to be determined through the sort of careful negotiation that characterized the inspector's most diplomatically successful resolutions. Sunday evening brought that particular quality of stillness that suggested Flaxborough was holding its breath, waiting for the next movement in a composition that had grown more complex than anyone had initially anticipated. Inspector Purbright, who had learned that the most significant developments often occurred when investigations appeared to have reached comfortable conclusions, was not entirely surprised when Constable Rawlinson arrived at his cottage with news that someone had once again taken liberties with municipal property. The silent watchman, discovered by the early shift at Higgins' bakery, now bore a second decoration. A rolled document had been secured to the shaft of his halberd with red sealing wax that gleamed in the morning light like a drop of blood on bronze. A typed strip, attached with the same methodical precision that had characterized Saturday's incident, declared in letters that seemed to march across the paper with military determination, "The Watchman objects." Mr. Puckle, summoned from his breakfast with the sort of urgency usually reserved for municipal disasters, stood at the statue's base regarding this latest development with an expression that suggested he had been expecting unwelcome news without knowing precisely what form it would take. His administrative composure had acquired visible cracks since Friday evening's revelations. "The sealing wax," Sergeant Love observed, approaching the evidence with professional caution, "bears an impression. Not a proper seal, but something circular. And there's a scent to it. Lavender, perhaps." The document itself, when carefully removed and examined, proved to be a copy of the county's preliminary plans for marketplace redevelopment. Someone had marked the silent watchman's position with a thick red circle and had written in a hand that possessed the confident clarity of classroom instruction, "Here he stands. Here he will stand." Mr. Puckle's confession, delivered in his office while the morning light revealed dust motes dancing like tiny conspirators in the air, transformed the investigation from a simple case of municipal mischief into something approaching justified rebellion. His testimony carried the precision of someone who had spent considerable time organizing uncomfortable facts into acceptable explanations. "The county's ultimatum arrived by special delivery Friday morning," he explained, producing a folder that bore official seals and the sort of language that brooked no discussion. 30 days for complete compliance with the modernization scheme. The mayor was instructed to present the proposal to an emergency council session scheduled for tomorrow morning. No consultation, no community input, simply administrative implementation of predetermined policy. The documents revealed the full scope of what the conspirators had discovered through their unauthorized research. The silent watchman's removal was merely the opening movement in a comprehensive transformation that would eliminate most features distinguishing Flaxborough from any number of similar places that had sacrificed character for efficiency. The financial incentives were substantial, but carried obligations that would bind future generations to policies they had no voice in creating. Miss Teatime's historical research had revealed legal precedents for community resistance dating back to the original 1788 controversy. Puckle continued with growing confidence in his narrative. Mrs. Puckle's financial analysis demonstrated that the county's immediate payments would be offset by long-term revenue losses from tourism and local commerce. Councillor Sedge provided documentation of his family's historical connection to the statue's original commission. Mayor Jellaby, discovered in his garden attempting to prune roses with the distracted air of someone whose mind was occupied by more pressing concerns than horticultural precision, exhibited the defensive posture of a man who had discovered that civic leadership sometimes required choosing between impossible alternatives. His secateurs moved with random determination, creating the sort of aggressive pruning that suggested internal conflict expressed through external action. The county's proposals, he admitted when confronted with evidence of his weekend telephone conversations, placed me in an impossible position. Reject their ultimatum and face financial penalties that would bankrupt the borough. Accept their terms and oversee the destruction of everything that makes Flaxborough distinctive. His voice carried the weariness of someone who had spent sleepless nights wrestling with conscience and discovering that administrative duty and personal conviction could not always be reconciled through careful compromise. I may have suggested to certain parties that a demonstration of community sentiment might strengthen our negotiating position. He continued with the careful precision of someone walking across diplomatic thin ice. If the county could be shown that Flaxborough possessed citizens willing to defend their heritage, perhaps more favorable terms might be achieved. The sealing wax, when examined under proper light, told its own story of careful preparation and symbolic intention. The impression bore the faint outline of a signet ring with a chipped edge, the sort of family jewelry that carried historical weight rather than monetary value. Embedded within the translucent red were tiny fibers that suggested contact with fine fabric, possibly wool or silk. The typed strip displayed the characteristic irregularities of the circulation clerk's machine at the Flaxborough Citizen, an aging Underwood whose E&T had developed personalities of their own. Yet the typing technique suggested someone more familiar with official correspondence than newspaper production, indicating either borrowed equipment or collaborative effort. Most significantly, the document itself had been removed from the borough surveyor's office using a key that should have been secured over the weekend. Mr. Pilkington's discovery that one of his drafting lamps had been borrowed and returned without authorization suggested the same careful planning that had characterized Saturday morning's installation. Mrs. Harker's testimony, delivered while she applied moral pressure to a stubborn stain in the council chamber, revealed the weekend's activities with the precision of someone who had observed municipal behavior without being impressed by its pretensions. Saturday evening there was considerable activity in the building. She reported while attacking the stain with renewed determination. Voices in the mayor's office well past normal hours, the service entrance used multiple times, and someone with considerable knowledge of where things were kept borrowing equipment from locked cupboards. The evidence suggested not impulsive demonstration, but carefully orchestrated civic theater, designed to force public discussion of matters that administrative discretion had kept private. The conspirators had possessed legitimate grievances, had attempted official resolution, and had resorted to symbolic gesture only when traditional channels proved inadequate for addressing confidential negotiations conducted without community consultation. As Monday morning progressed toward the emergency council, session that would determine Flaxborough's future, Inspector Purbright found himself investigating not criminal conspiracy, but the sort of civic desperation that arose when democratic processes failed to accommodate legitimate community concerns. The technical evidence confirmed collaborative action involving multiple participants with complementary skills, but the motivation had transcended personal grievance to embrace community preservation. The investigation had revealed moral complexities that simple criminal prosecution could not address. The conspirators' methods had violated municipal dignity and legal procedure, but their objectives sought to protect community values that official processes had neglected. Their unauthorized access to confidential information had been unlawful, but their research had revealed administrative failures that demanded correction. Most significantly, The mayor's tacit cooperation suggested that even municipal authority recognized the legitimacy of the protesters' concerns, though official position prevented open support for their methods. The emergency council session would force resolution of tensions that had been building since the county's first approaches to local government. The silent watchman, standing guard through another morning of municipal uncertainty, had become more than the target of symbolic decoration. He represented the embodiment of community vigilance that current civic processes had apparently forgotten. His temporary adornment with both the mayor's chain and the county's plans served as protest, reminder, and challenge to find solutions that preserved both progress and tradition. Purbright prepared for the delicate conversations that would be required before the council session, knowing that resolution would need to balance justice with wisdom while addressing the legitimate concerns that had driven respectable citizens beyond conventional behavior. The silent watcher's revenge was revealing itself as principled resistance to undemocratic imposition, though whether such resistance could be accommodated within legal frameworks remained to be determined through negotiations that would test both administrative flexibility and community determination. The morning's developments had raised stakes beyond simple municipal mischief to questions of democratic participation and community self-determination. The investigation was approaching its climax, though Purbright suspected the resolution would require diplomatic skills that transcended simple law enforcement to address the fundamental tensions between efficiency and identity that characterized modern civic governance. Monday's emergency council session convened with that particular atmosphere of civic theater that suggested Flaxborough had finally discovered an occasion worthy of its accumulated dignity. The council chamber, normally populated by half-empty meetings discussing drainage improvements and parking regulations, now hosted what appeared to be half the town's adult population, each bearing the expression of citizens who had discovered that democracy occasionally required their personal attention. Inspector Purbright occupied a chair near the rear, having learned that the most revealing observations often occurred when authority appeared to be paying attention to other matters. His notebook remained closed, though his attention catalogued every gesture, glance, and nervous adjustment that characterized people operating under unusual pressure. The morning's discovery of the second message on the silent watchman, the watchman objects, had transformed what some still considered elaborate mischief into something approaching organized resistance. Mayor Jellaby called the session to order with hands that trembled slightly as they gripped his gavel. The county's representative, a Mr. Thornfield, whose briefcase suggested someone who traveled with predetermined solutions to local problems, sat with the patient confidence of authority that expected compliance rather than discussion. His presence lent the proceedings an air of administrative inevitability that the gathered citizens seemed determined to challenge. Mr. Thornfield rose with the practiced ease of someone who had delivered similar presentations to numerous communities that had imagined their opinions mattered in administrative decisions. His charts and projections possessed the glossy authority of documents designed to discourage questions rather than encourage discussion. "The modernization scheme represents essential progress," he declared while unveiling drawings that transformed Flaxborough's familiar irregularities into geometric precision. Traffic flow analysis indicates current arrangements create bottlenecks that impede commercial development and emergency access. The silent watchman, regrettably, occupies the precise location where modern requirements demand improved circulation. The proposed changes revealed themselves as more comprehensive than anyone had publicly acknowledged. Not merely the statue's removal, but the elimination of traditional market arrangements, the widening of approach roads, and the installation of traffic management systems that would prioritize efficiency over the sort of leisurely commerce that had characterized Flaxborough for centuries. Compliance with the modernization schedule will result in immediate compensation of £37,000. Thornfield continued with the satisfaction of someone who believed financial incentives could resolve any objection. Failure to cooperate will result in compulsory purchase orders and legal proceedings that will achieve identical results at considerably greater expense to local ratepayers. Miss Teatime rose with that particular dignity that characterized someone who had been preparing for this moment throughout a lifetime of civic involvement. Her research folder, when opened, revealed documentation that transformed the county's confident assertions into questionable administrative overreach. Mr. Thornfield's proposals, she began with careful precision, demonstrate remarkable ignorance of both historical precedent and legal requirement. The 1788 Borough Charter specifically protects landmarks commissioned by community subscription from removal without full council approval following proper consultation. The Silent Watchman qualifies for such protection under both historical and legal criteria. Her presentation combined Miss Teatime's scholarly thoroughness with the sort of passionate conviction that made her flower arranging circle attendance mandatory rather than voluntary. Legal precedents, historical records, and community rights legislation combined to create opposition that official efficiency could not simply dismiss through financial inducement. Councillor Sedge contributed genealogical evidence of his family's connection to the statue's original commission, his voice carrying new authority as he spoke of ancestors who had faced similar challenges to community autonomy. Mrs. Puckle presented financial analysis, demonstrating that the county's immediate payments would be offset by long-term revenue losses from tourism and traditional commerce. Throughout the proceedings, Inspector Purbright noted the subtle communications passing between the principal conspirators. Miss Teatime's glance toward Mrs. Puckle when discussing documentation access. Councillor Sedge's unconscious adjustment of his signet ring when historical precedents were mentioned. The mayor's careful avoidance of eye contact with any of them while maintaining official neutrality. Most significantly, he observed the coral pink lipstick mark on the teacup beside Mrs. Puckle's seat, the same shade that had appeared in the mayor's office, confirming her presence during Friday evening's unauthorized consultation. The technical evidence was building toward a picture of collaborative resistance that transcended simple criminal mischief. During the adjournment, Purbright conducted his most revealing interview. Mrs. Harker, cornered near the cleaning supplies, provided testimony that illuminated the weekend's actual complexity. Sunday evening, there was considerable activity around the statue, she reported with the precision of someone whose observations had been carefully catalogued. Saw figures moving about with purpose, not furtive exactly, but determined. Someone with a torch, examining the plans that had been attached. And there was that smell of lavender again, stronger than before. The sealing wax analysis had revealed fibers consistent with Mrs. Puckle's wool coat, while the typed message displayed the characteristic irregularities of the citizen's aging underwood, equipment that Mr. Mortlake had confirmed lending to civic-minded citizens requiring urgent communication facilities. The red wax itself bore the impression of Councillor Sedge's chipped signet ring, while the document had been removed from official files using Mrs. Puckle's administrative access. Most tellingly, the timing of Sunday evening's installation coincided with the mayor's presence in his office, ostensibly reviewing agenda items, but actually, Purbright suspected, providing tacit supervision for the second symbolic gesture. The conspiracy had evolved beyond simple protest into something approaching official sanction disguised as unauthorized demonstration. When the session resumed, Mayor Jellaby's prepared remarks took an unexpected direction. Instead of presenting the county's ultimatum as administrative necessity, he spoke with growing passion about the responsibilities of civic leadership and the importance of community consultation in decisions affecting local character. "The proposals before us," he declared, his voice gaining strength as he abandoned his prepared script, "require careful consideration of not merely traffic efficiency, but community values. The Silent Watchman has stood guard over our commerce for centuries. His removal should not be decided by distant authority without proper consultation with those he protects." Mr. Thornfield's expression suggested someone discovering that routine administrative implementation had encountered unexpected complications. His confident presentation began to acquire defensive characteristics as legal and historical evidence accumulated beyond simple dismissal. As Monday afternoon progressed toward its climactic vote, the full scope of the conspiracy became apparent not through dramatic revelation, but through the quiet accumulation of evidence that characterized Purbright's most successful investigations. The weekend's symbolic protests had been carefully orchestrated by citizens who had discovered that official channels provided insufficient protection against administrative decisions made without community consultation. The technical evidence confirmed collaborative action involving multiple participants with complementary skills, but the motivation had transcended personal grievance to embrace community preservation. Miss Teatime's wire-working expertise, Councillor Sedge's physical capability, Mrs. Puckle's administrative access, and the mayor's tacit cooperation had combined to create effective resistance to undemocratic imposition. The investigation had revealed not criminal conspiracy, but principled resistance to administrative overreach. The conspirators' methods had violated procedure and protocol, but their objectives served democratic principles that official processes had neglected. The Silent Watchman's temporary decorations had achieved their intended purpose of forcing public discussion of matters that administrative discretion had attempted to resolve through confidential negotiation. The council session concluded with unanimous rejection of the county's ultimatum and authorization for proper legal consultation regarding community rights and historical preservation. The Silent Watchman would remain in his traditional position while alternative solutions were developed that accommodated both modern requirements and community values. As evening settled over Flaxborough, Inspector Purbright prepared for tomorrow's delicate conversations that would distinguish between justified protest and unlawful demonstration, knowing that resolution would require diplomatic skills that transcended simple law enforcement to address the fundamental tensions between efficiency and democracy that had made the Silent Watcher's revenge both necessary and effective. Tuesday morning arrived with that particular quality of bright optimism that suggested Flaxborough had rediscovered its civic confidence, though Inspector Purbright had learned to regard municipal satisfaction with the same caution he applied to unexpectedly cooperative witnesses. The council's unanimous rejection of the county's ultimatum had sent ripples of quiet triumph through the town. Yet certain details continued to suggest that Saturday morning's symbolic protest had been merely the visible portion of something considerably more complex than principled resistance. His morning began with an unexpected telephone call from Mr. Gedge, the high street jeweler, whose voice carried that mixture of professional excitement and civic concern that characterized someone who had made an uncomfortable discovery while attempting to be helpful. "Inspector," he began with careful precision, "you mentioned the insurance people might require evaluation of the mayoral chain. I took the liberty of conducting a preliminary examination yesterday evening. There are matters that require immediate discussion." Purbright, who had learned that jewelers' discoveries often illuminated more than precious metals, arranged to meet Mr. Gedge at the town hall within the hour. The morning's other appointments could accommodate the sort of delay that genuine expertise occasionally demanded. The mayor's office, when it hosted this impromptu consultation, bore that atmosphere of civic theater that characterized Flaxborough's most significant moments. Mayor Jellaby stood near the window with the defensive posture of someone whose prepared explanations had been revealed as inadequate, while Mr. Puckle occupied his usual chair with obvious reluctance to participate in discussions that might require uncomfortable admissions. Mr. Gedge produced his jeweler's loupe with the reverent care usually reserved for family heirlooms or final demands. "The chain possesses admirable craftsmanship," he announced while examining the links with professional thoroughness. "The engraving is impeccable, the weight appropriate, the general appearance entirely convincing." He paused, allowing this assessment to settle among his audience like a cat choosing where to sit. However, the hallmarks display certain irregularities that suggest recent manufacture rather than 19th century craftsmanship. The patina appears artificially aged, and the wear patterns indicate careful simulation rather than genuine use. The silence that followed possessed more weight than the revelation that had created it. Purbright made notes that appeared casual while recording details that might prove significant. A replica, Mr. Gedge. A most accomplished replica, Inspector. Gold content adequate for insurance purposes. Craftsmanship sufficient to satisfy casual inspection, but not the original chain that graced mayoral necks since 1847. His voice carried the authority of someone whose professional reputation depended upon distinguishing between genuine articles and convincing substitutes. Mr. Puckle's subsequent admission transformed the investigation from community protest into something approaching municipal fraud, though fraud motivated by civic necessity rather than personal gain. His testimony carried the precision of someone who had spent sleepless nights organizing uncomfortable facts into defensible explanations. The county's financial pressure created impossible choices, he explained while his hands performed nervous adjustments to already organized documents. £37,000 compensation for compliance, bankruptcy proceedings for resistance. The original chain, when valued for insurance purposes, proved worth considerably more than its official assessment suggested. The revelation illuminated Friday evening's heated discussion in new light. The unauthorized consultation had involved not merely symbolic protest, but practical negotiation about preserving community assets while appearing to comply with administrative requirements. A gentleman from Peterborough, Puckle continued with growing confidence in his narrative, had expressed interest in acquiring provincial regalia for private collectors. The transaction provided funds that could be held in reserve while the replica satisfied daily ceremonial requirements. If the county's proposals had proceeded, the compensation would have enabled repurchase of the original. If community resistance succeeded, the arrangement could be quietly reversed. Mayor Jellyby's confession revealed the moral complexity that had driven the week's events beyond simple municipal mischief into carefully orchestrated civic theater. His voice carried the weariness of someone who had discovered that leadership sometimes required choosing between legal compliance and community preservation. The replica was commissioned 3 weeks ago, he admitted while avoiding eye contact with his municipal colleagues. Mr. Puckle's research had revealed the chain's true value, while the county's confidential correspondence indicated their ultimatum would provide no opportunity for proper negotiation. We required both time and resources that official channels could not provide. The Friday evening gathering had been the culmination of desperate planning by municipal officials who had discovered that administrative duty and community loyalty could not always be reconciled through conventional means. Miss Teatime's historical research, Councillor Sedge's family connection, and Mrs. Puckle's financial analysis had provided justification for actions that violated procedure while serving democratic principles. As Tuesday afternoon progressed toward evening, Inspector Purbright prepared for the sort of careful observation that would reveal whether Mr. Puckle's arrangement with his mysterious buyer could be quietly reversed before administrative investigation required formal prosecution. The technical evidence confirmed that the original chain had been removed weeks before Saturday's symbolic protest, suggesting planning that extended well beyond community resistance to include municipal self-preservation. We shall observe Mr. Gedge's shop tonight, he informed Sergeant Love while organizing the evening's surveillance requirements. If the original chain can be recovered through voluntary cooperation, certain administrative irregularities might be resolved without destroying the community harmony that yesterday's council session achieved. The stakeout would test whether civic pride could motivate the sort of personal sacrifice that transformed technical violations into redeemable mistakes. Mr. Puckle faced the choice between preserving his secret arrangement and restoring municipal property to its rightful position. As darkness settled over Flaxborough, the town prepared for the sort of quiet drama that characterized its most significant moments. The silent watchman, standing guard through another night of municipal uncertainty, maintained his bronze vigilance while human guardians arranged themselves in positions that would reveal whether community loyalty could overcome personal interest. Constable Rawlinson occupied the shadows near the bakery's rear entrance, his patience rivaling that of professional fishermen waiting for reluctant catches. Another constable positioned himself where Mill Lane met the marketplace, ready to observe whether any nocturnal visitors approached the jeweler's shop with packages that might contain municipal property seeking restoration. Mr. Gedge, having prepared his back room with a sort of careful arrangement that suggested someone expecting either customers or confessions, maintained his vigil beside a velvet pouch that contained nothing but possibilities. The Morocco case that had held the replica chain rested nearby, ready to receive whatever the night might bring. Inspector Purbright, observing from the insurance office lobby across the street, prepared for revelations that would distinguish between administrative corruption and community preservation. The silent watcher's revenge was approaching its final movement, though whether that conclusion would require prosecution or merely acknowledgement of human complexity remained to be determined through the sort of patient observation that characterized his most diplomatically successful investigations. The night held its breath while Flaxborough's various guardians, bronze and human, official and unofficial, maintained their respective vigils over a community that had discovered the sometimes uncomfortable relationship between legal compliance and moral necessity. Tuesday's dawn arrived with that particular quality of grey light that suggested autumn had decided to conduct its final business with diplomatic precision. Precisely the sort of weather Inspector Purbright found most conducive to resolutions that required balancing justice with community harmony. The night's vigil at Mr. Gedge's shop had concluded with the quiet dignity that characterized Flaxborough's most delicate transactions, though certain revelations had emerged that would require the sort of careful handling that preserved both legal propriety and municipal face. At 11:30 the previous evening, Mr. Puckle had appeared at the jeweler's rear entrance carrying a leather attaché case with the reverent care usually reserved for family Bibles or documents that could not afford to be mislaid. His movements possessed none of the furtiveness that characterized criminal behavior, but rather of the deliberate purpose of someone fulfilling obligations that official channels could not accommodate. The exchange, when it occurred under Purbright's patient observation, had displayed all the dignity of a state ceremony conducted in miniature. The original mayoral chain, when restored to proper examination, revealed the patina and wear patterns that 2 centuries of civic ceremony had created, characteristics that no replica, however skillful, could authentically reproduce. Mr. Gedge's professional assessment confirmed what the investigation had gradually revealed. The Saturday morning incident had involved not theft but careful preservation disguised as symbolic protest. Wednesday morning found the principal participants assembled in the town hall's committee room with the careful composure of people about to participate in a ceremony whose outcome remained diplomatically uncertain. Inspector Purbright occupied the head of the polished mahogany table, his notebook open but his pen at rest, suggesting someone whose conclusions had been reached through observation rather than interrogation. Mayor Jellaby sat with the relieved expression of someone who had discovered that confession could be less burdensome than concealment. Mr. Puckle adjusted his spectacles with nervous precision, while Miss Teatime maintained the alert dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for moments that tested civic principle. Councillor Sedge unconsciously turned his signet ring, and Mrs. Puckle's coral pink lipstick had been applied with the sort of careful attention that suggested important occasions demanded proper presentation. The matter of the mayoral chain, Purbright began with that unhurried precision that characterized his most successful explanations, has revealed more about Flaxborough's civic character than any municipal audit could have accomplished. What appeared to be simple mischief has proved to be principled resistance to administrative overreach. He allowed this assessment to settle among his audience like dust choosing where to rest. The sequence of events began 3 weeks ago when Mr. Puckle, faced with the county's confidential ultimatum, made the difficult decision to preserve municipal assets through irregular means. The original chain was removed from its official position and replaced with a commissioned replica of admirable quality but recent manufacture. Purbright's explanation proceeded with methodical precision, addressing each element of evidence that the investigation had accumulated. The replica satisfied ceremonial requirements, while the original remained safely beyond county reach, creating time for the sort of community resistance that democratic principles demanded but administrative efficiency discouraged. He turned to Mrs. Puckle, whose administrative expertise had proved crucial to the conspiracy's success. Your role extended beyond simple cooperation to active facilitation. The spare office key's mysterious journey to the minutes box provided access for Friday evening's unauthorized consultation. Your knowledge of municipal procedures enabled the careful coordination that made Saturday morning's demonstration possible. The coral pink lipstick mark on the mayor's teacup, the photocopied documents revealing the county's true intentions, and the after-hours access to confidential files had been elements in a comprehensive strategy designed to preserve community autonomy, while appearing to comply with administrative requirements. Miss Teatime's wire-working expertise, Purbright continued, combined with Councillor Sedge's physical capability and family connection to create symbolic protest that forced public discussion of matters that official discretion had kept private. The choice of the silent watchman as recipient was deliberately ironic. The Bronze Guardian, commissioned to celebrate successful resistance to unwelcome change, had been decorated with symbols of authority to suggest that current leadership required reminder of historical precedent. The investigation's most delicate revelation concerned Mayor Jellyby's tacit cooperation with activities that violated municipal procedure while serving community interests. The Friday evening consultation extended well beyond routine business to include comprehensive planning for symbolic demonstration. Your knowledge of the conspiracy's development, while not constituting direct participation, represented the sort of administrative flexibility that enabled community resistance to achieve its objectives. Jellyby's voice, when he responded, carried the weariness of someone who had discovered that civic leadership sometimes required choosing between impossible alternatives. The county's proposals placed me in an untenable position. Reject their ultimatum and face financial penalties that would bankrupt the borough. Accept their terms and oversee the destruction of everything that makes Flaxborough distinctive. Purbright's final assessment balanced legal requirements with diplomatic necessity. The methods employed violated municipal procedure and administrative protocol. However, the objectives served democratic principles that official processes had neglected. The symbolic protests achieved community consultation that confidential negotiation had prevented. The formal consequences reflected this careful balance. Mr. Puckle would face administrative reprimand for unauthorized handling of municipal property, but his actions had preserved assets that conventional channels could not have protected. Miss Teatime, Councillor Sedge, and Mrs. Puckle would receive official cautions for their roles in the conspiracy, tempered by recognition that their research had revealed administrative failures requiring correction. The original chain will be quietly restored to its proper position, Purbright announced, while the replica finds honorable retirement in the museum's civic collection. The county, faced with legal challenges based on historical precedent and community rights legislation, has agreed to negotiate alternative solutions that preserve both traffic efficiency and traditional character. As Wednesday afternoon settled over Flaxborough, the town resumed its customary rhythms with the quiet satisfaction of a community that had successfully defended its essential character. The marketplace retained its familiar irregularities, The silent watchman stood in his traditional position, and the emergency council session had established precedents for community consultation that would influence future administrative decisions. Mr. Thornfield departed for county offices with the expression of administrative authority that had discovered local communities occasionally possessed resources for effective resistance to predetermined policies. His briefcase, which had arrived filled with confident solutions, departed containing requests for additional consultation and revised proposals that acknowledged community input. The flower arranging circle resumed its weekly meetings with enhanced appreciation for the practical applications of wire-working techniques, though Miss Teatime's future demonstrations would be conducted with careful attention to their symbolic implications. Councillor Sedge's garden achieved new levels of disciplined beauty as his roses responded to training methods that had been tested under unusual circumstances. Mrs. Puckle's resignation from the Amenities Committee was accepted with the sort of gracious regret that suggested her administrative skills would be missed more than her irregular applications of them. Mr. Puckle's confession, filed with appropriate discretion, would serve as reminder that municipal assets occasionally required protection through methods that challenged conventional procedure. Inspector Purbright completed his report with the diplomatic precision that characterized his most successful resolutions. The investigation had revealed not criminal conspiracy, but the sort of principled resistance that occasionally became necessary when official channels failed to accommodate legitimate community concerns. The conspirators had employed irregular methods, but methods directed toward preserving democratic participation rather than achieving individual advantage. As evening settled over Flaxborough, the town carried its various portions of satisfaction and relief into dreams that would be shaped by the knowledge that community determination could still influence administrative decision. The silent watchman, standing guard through another night of restored municipal harmony, maintained his bronze vigilance over citizens who had rediscovered that democracy occasionally required more active participation than simply attending meetings and hoping for the best. The silent watcher's revenge had been revealed as community preservation disguised as municipal mischief, serving justice through methods that satisfied both legal requirements and moral necessity. Flaxborough had defended its character not through grand gestures of rebellion, but through the careful coordination of citizens who understood that sometimes the most effective resistance wore the disguise of elaborate pranks. Inspector Purbright locked his office and walked home through streets that had returned to their familiar patterns, carrying with him the quiet satisfaction of someone whose patience had been rewarded with the sort of resolution that preserved both order and justice. The case was closed, the community was intact, and tomorrow would bring the comfortable return to routine paperwork and minor infractions that characterized peaceful municipal governance. The end.